Hello everyone, welcome to Options with Doug, streaming live on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Bookmap Discord and the Bookmap YouTube channel. Before I get started, I need to go through the disclosures. General disclosure, all Bookmap limited materials, information, and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. Risk disclosure, trading futures, equities, and options involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Here's my contact information. The best way to get in touch with me is through Discord. My name on Discord is Doug P. Also in Bookmap Discord, there's an Options-Doug chat channel. You can post questions, comments, and content related to the topics of my presentation and to the topic of the channel that I'll go through in just a moment. I'm also on X. My name there is @DougPless. For those of you who've seen my webinars before, please bear with me. I want to make sure everyone understands my approach to trading. So here are the key tenets to my approach to trading. I believe that options trades and market maker hedging activity are key drivers of price in many stocks and futures. That certainly applies to large cap tech stocks like the Magnificent Seven stocks, as well as the equity index futures like the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100. And for the S&P 500, SPX is the underlying index. SPY is the ETF version of that index, and the ES futures contract is a derivative of SPX. And when traders buy and sell puts and calls in SPX and SPY, market makers take the opposite side of the trades and they hedge their dealt exposure with the ES futures. And for the Nasdaq 100, NDX is the underlying index. QQQ is the much more liquid ETF version of that index. And the NQ futures contract is a derivative of NDX. And when traders buy and sell puts and calls in SPX and NDX and QQQ, market makers take the opposite side of the trades and they hedge their dealt exposure with NQ futures. The focus of my presentation today and the focus of the Options-Doug chat channel is options order flow, the impact of options markets on stocks and futures, and the influence of market maker hedging flow on price action. I have a two-step process for trading, and the first is planning, and I use positional analysis. I look at how traders and market makers are positioned in the options market and how those positions change from day to day to develop a thesis regarding expected trading range and volatility for the day as well as a directional bias. And the second step in my process is execution. I look at real-time order flow in Bookmap and real-time market maker hedging flow on Spotgamma Hero to confirm my thesis and for setups. And when I talk about setups today, I will be focusing on an underlying asset. Setups in that asset can be taken with futures contracts, shares of stock, or options, depending on the asset as well as the way you like to trade. Questions and comments are welcome, and I will be watching both the Options-Doug chat channel as well as the chat and YouTube for your questions and comments. Please feel free to post. I'll do my best to answer your questions. Here's my agenda for the day, Friday, March 13th. First of all, I want to go over news items, primarily economic data that came out today. Then I'll go through my positional analysis. Then I'll review some setups from earlier today. Then I'll take a look at the live market. And when I get to live market, if anyone has any stocks they want me to take a look at, please let me know and I'll be glad to do that. Well, let's get started with news. With economic data, there was a boatload of economic data that came out this morning. Let's take a look at that. So 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. First of all, GDP came out, and that was less than expected. Then durable goods orders came out, also less than expected. And then PCE data came out. So there are different versions of PCE, core and non-core, month over month, year over year, but mostly in line. That was all the data that came out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And then at 10 a.m., Michigan consumer sentiment came out, and that was greater than expected. And also the JOLTS jobs opening data came out, and that was also greater than expected. So a lot of key important data that came out this morning. Really not a whole lot of reaction to any of that. Market much more concerned about the situation in Iran, oil, and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. All right, so that's the data. There's some big items coming up next week. More about that toward the end. All right, let's move on to positional analysis. Let's start with the S&P 500. This is the ES futures and Bookmap. And this is showing the entire session that began yesterday evening, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So you can see the ES made a low just below the SPY 663 level. Early morning hours. Nice steady rally up after 5 a.m. Very brief bullish opening drive and then a sharp drop down. All right, let's zoom into the more recent price action. So a lot of round numbers in play for SPY. Here's the SPY 672 level. Acting as resistance. And then we'll see there's a key level down below SPX 6650. That's where a lot of positive gamma is concentrated. So far acting as support. And that's part of a larger short-term iron condor. So we'll take a look at that in detail in just a couple of minutes. All right, so sharp drop lower series of lower highs down to this positive gamma support at 6650. Excuse me. All right, before I spend more time on this chart, let's step back. Let's take a look at our higher time frame. Let's go to SPX, the underlying index. And this is a 1 year, one day chart in Thinkorswim. This is showing the rally that began last April and turned into consolidation in the first part of this year, 2026, and now has turned to a downtrend. All right, let's take a look at the most recent price action now. Let's go to a 30-day 1-hour chart, and we can see this downtrend. So I love my trend lines here. So this is a linear regression channel right here that's drawn automatically, confirming the lower highs and lower lows in SPX. Downtrend line that I drew, and also this downtrend channel that began on Tuesday with this high right here. All right, so one other notable point. So far, this low from Monday is still holding. So if SPX breaks down below the 6650 level, that could be next in line. All right, hey Stephen, welcome, glad you're here. All right, let's take a look at the levels on this chart. First of all, the expected moves. Dashed purple line showing the lower and upper weekly expected move. This is based on the options market, based on the closing price for SPX from Friday. Those levels remain in place for the entire week. Then the dashed blue lines are showing the lower and upper daily expected move, also based on the options market. This is based on the closing price for SPX from yesterday. So those levels do change every day, and I post the expected moves every day the day before for SPX, ES, and NQ in the Options Jug chat channel in Discord. All right, so with the increased implied volatility, of course, the expected moves widen out quite a bit. So for example, the expected move for today for SPX was plus or minus almost 79 points. And so far, SPX staying within both of those ranges. All right, let's take a look at the Spotgamma levels on this chart. These are shown with the dark red lines. They're available to Spotgamma subscribers. I'm going to point out the key daily levels. By the way, they're based on gamma-weighted open interest. They're updated once a day. Again, the key daily levels, first of all, put wall has moved down to 6,600 now, after remaining at 6,700 for quite some time. So I view that as quite significant, that the put wall has now moved down to 6,600. That's a strike with a large net negative gamma that can be expected to act as support. All right, the next level up is the volatility trigger at 6,800. That is Spotgamma's proprietary volatility and gamma flip level. Below that level, market makers' position on the gamma curve is negative. In a negative gamma environment, market makers have to trade with price to hedge their delta exposure. That tends to enhance or increase volatility. Above that level, market makers' position on the gamma curve is positive. In a positive gamma environment, market makers have to trade against price to hedge their delta exposure, and that tends to subdue or decrease volatility. And we'll see in just a minute when we take a look at the trace tool that gamma is quite negative as it has been all week. All right, and that level also moved down from yesterday. Next level up is the absolute gamma strike at 7,000. That's a strike with large absolute positive and negative gamma. That's where most of the gamma-weighted open interest is concentrated. And then finally, the call wall remains at 7,100. That's a strike with large net positive gamma that can be expected to act as resistance, and certainly is not in play anytime soon. All right, most significant here, the put wall moved lower, and the volatility trigger moves slightly lower as well. All right, let's wrap up our review of SPX with a 1-minute chart. So we can see this downtrend channel that I drew this morning. SPX did trade up above it for a few minutes, then reverse lower. So that's that sharp reversal lower that I was talking about at 9:45. So about a 15-minute bullish opening drive, then a drop down. And now SPX is chopping up and down around this key level that I mentioned. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. This 6650 large positive gamma level. And again, SPX trading well below its volatility trigger in firmly negative gamma. All right, let's wrap up our view of the S&P 500 by taking a look at SPY, the other underlying index component. Let me zoom in just a little bit here. All right, so the gray shading is showing pre-market hours, and then the dark shading is showing regular trading hours. You can see this nice head and shoulders pattern here. $670 large gamma 2 level acting as resistance. Then a sharp break below that level down to this combo level. And again, I think the key level down here is that SPX 6650 large positive gamma. Again, we'll take a look at that in just a minute. All right, back to Bookmap ES futures. All right, so I have these SPY and SPX levels on this chart. Again, SPY 672 resistance. There's the SPY 670 large gamma 2 level. And then here's the SPX 6650 level. And again, price chopping up and down around that level as it has been for the last couple of hours. And BG classes, welcome, glad you're here. Thank you very much. Terzog, welcome, glad you're here as well. Ask, will you be willing to share the computation of the expected moves? Sure. Yeah, I can do that. And I get that from an options chain, but there are many ways to calculate that. So I'll take a look at that in just a minute. All right, that's SPX. Let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go to Thinkorswim. Let's take a look at SPX, options chain. Thinkorswim a little bit slow today. All right, so I get the expected moves right over here. So every day, after 5, somewhere between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m., so that's when SPX closes at 4 p.m., options close at 4:15. So anytime after then, I can get SPX. And then futures close at 5 p.m. I'm talking about Eastern Daylight Time. So at that time, somewhere between 5 and 6, when futures reopen, I get expected moves for SPX, ES, and NQ. And I just get this over here. So if I'm looking for the expected move for Monday, what I'm going to do is go right over here. And I'll do this after the close today. Right now it's showing plus or minus 104 points. So that will reduce as time passes and the market approaches the close today. But I expect it to be quite high. VIX is up a little bit on the day, but certainly traders are going to want to be well protected over the weekend. So I'm looking for a higher expected move. At least until Monday, until some resolution of the situation in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. All right, you can also, any expected move you see is going to be based on this equation right here. So you can find that anywhere. All right, so that's the expected move. Price times implied volatility times number of days. So for one day, it would be 1 divided by 365, or some people use 252, the number of trading days. All right, hope that helps. And Implame, welcome, glad you're here. Sorry about pronunciation. All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at Nasdaq. All right, so it looks like now ES is breaking down below that 6650 level. We'll take a closer look at that in just a couple of minutes. Let's take a quick look at Nasdaq. Also breaking down, making new lows for the session here. All right, so this is the NQ futures and Bookmap. By the way, for ES, I'm showing SPX and SPY levels on this chart. There's a difference in price between ES and SPX. And today it's right around 4 points. So I'm showing, SPX 6650. I'm having trouble with my pen tool here. I don't know why it's not. Not working. Sorry about that. Try one more time. All right, sorry, my pen tool is not working. I may have to restart it. Try again. All right, so anyway, 6650 SPX. I'm showing at ES 6654. All right, S&P 500 breaking down now. Let's take a look at Nasdaq. All right, so Nasdaq, I have QQQ and NDX levels on this chart. And I've got a couple of key reactions here. I know there are a lot of lines on this chart, so let's step back. Let's take a look at the underlying index charts. So let's go to QQQ. Another head and shoulders pattern here. All right, key for today. Volatility trigger at 601. All right, my pen tool just stopped working. Not working on my left screen for some reason. All right, so anyway, QQQ 601. Volatility trigger. Note the sharp drop lower as QQQ reversed down below its volatility trigger. Spent some time chopping around 595 and just recently dropped down to 593. Note also the 601 level, 600 level. That's the absolute gamma strike. All right, by the way, I also forgot to mention for SPX, well, I did, that volatility trigger and put wall move lower, so that's a bearish brace for SPX. And for SPY, the volatility trigger also move lower, and the absolute gamma strike move lower, so that's a bearish brace for SPY as well. And for QQQ, the volatility trigger and put wall move lower. Put wall move down to 590 for QQQ. All right, let's take a look at the other underlying index component. And there's NDX. Note the breakdown at the resistance level from yesterday, right around the 24,700 large gamma 4 level, acting as resistance again today. And then NDX also reversed sharply lower down below its volatility trigger. Nissan, welcome, glad you're here. Asked, do you set a take profit and stop loss for every trade? Or do you like to use a trailing stop loss? Well, I use a take profit and stop loss. So I use brackets for every trade, for every day trade. And I do trail a stop, but I do it manually. I don't use an automatic trailing stop. So I set take profits at one or more levels. So once my first take profit is hit, then I'll move my stop to break even. And if the trade continues to go on my way, I will move the stop up or down, depending on the direction of the trade. All right, there's Nasdaq. Let's zoom in on this. The levels that I mentioned before, the reversal down below the QQQ 601 volatility trigger, and then the NDX 24,650 volatility trigger. All right, next level down below. Here's the QQQ 590 put wall, and then the NQ lower daily expected move just above that. All right, that's Nasdaq. All right, let's wrap up our positional analysis by taking a look at Gamma that I mentioned before. So let's go to the Spotgamma trace Gamma heat map. There's that large 6650 level that I was mentioning, large positive Gamma, 99 percentile, and that is part of an iron condor. And the call spread, the Gamma at that level, has all but disappeared as time has passed, and also prices move down. So it looks like SPX currently trading right around 66.40. So what this chart is showing is market maker's Gamma position. Red shading indicates negative Gamma. Remember, negative Gamma, we're looking for higher volatility. Market makers trading with price. Blue shading shows positive Gamma. Remember, in positive Gamma, we're looking for lower volatility with market makers trading against price. So let's step back in time. So what we're going to do is go back to just after the cash open, 9:40. This chart is updated every 10 minutes. So we can see this short call spread. So this is showing market makers' position. Positive Gamma, they're long this strike, short this strike, indicating traders are short that call spread. So they're short 67.80 and long 85. So that's the call spread. The step through time, 10 minutes, 10 o'clock, and there's the short put spread. The Gamma appears at 66.50. Market makers along that strike and short the 45 strike. So there's that iron condor. You can clearly see the largest Gamma bars. All right, so as time passes, remember that very sharp reversal at 9:45, 9:46. So the Gamma at the upper strikes has disappeared as time has passed and price moves away. Remember, Gamma is greatest at the money at expiration. All right, so let's go to the current time now. So that Gamma remains at 66.50, and SPX is broken down through that. All right, so that's the current environment. All right, so let's take a look at some setups, then we'll get to the current market. So the levels that we looked at on this chart, the levels that I use for my positional analysis, they're updated once a day based on Gamma weighted open interest. Then the trace Gamma heat map that we just looked at is updated every 10 minutes. Now we're moving on to execution, moving on to real time. So this is the Spotgamma hero chart, hedging impact real-time options. This is showing options trades and market maker hedging activity for the S&P 500 index components. And we've already taken a look at a couple of those. That is SPX and SPY. It also includes ES and XSP. The white line is price for SPX, and the purple line is the index hero signal. The directional line indicates options delta. So a rising hero signal. Again, I keep forgetting my pen tool not working on this screen for some reason. All right, so a rising hero signal indicates traders are taking positive delta options positions, and a falling hero signal indicates they are taking negative delta positions. So rising line, positive delta, buying calls, selling puts. Falling hero line indicates traders are buying puts or selling calls. In each case, market makers take the opposite side of the trades, and they have to buy or sell futures to hedge their delta exposure since they want to remain delta neutral. Let's zoom in on this. So let's take a look at this short setup. 9:46. Hero signal makes a sharp reversal. That's right here, right after this flow alert that signals significant options activity and a potential reversal in hedging flow from positive delta to negative delta. That's exactly what happened, making that peak pattern, and then traders started taking negative delta positions. Let's see what they were doing. So initially they were selling puts, shown by the rising blue line, taking advantage of the high volatility. Then a few minutes later they started buying calls, shown by the rising orange line. Then at 9:46, call buyers took the foot off the gas, put sellers became put buyers, and the S&P 500 reversed lower. So this is the other hero signal that we can take a look at for the S&P 500. This is the S&P 500 equity signal showing options trades and market maker hedging activity for all 500 stocks in the S&P 500 index. Not as clear today as the index signal. Index signal typically shows the turning points a little bit more clearly than this signal. That was definitely the case today. All right, so let's go take a look at Bookmap. Let's zoom in on this. So we'll take a look at the first couple of hours of trade. All right, 9:30 cash open right here. Sorry, my pen tool's not working. So 9:30 cash open. You can see the green volume dots coming in here. Aggressive buyers. Rising cumulative volume delta down on the subchart. Then the sharp reversal. The heat map in Bookmap is showing a history of limit orders in the order book. So you can see there were some sellers coming in right around ES 67.38, something like that. Volume dots change from green to magenta. Volume dots show market buy minus sell. Green volume dots indicate more buyers than sellers. Magenta dots, more sellers than buyers. And from that point on, ES makes a series of lower highs driven by aggressive sellers, put buyers, call sellers, as well as a sell stop order shown by the falling yellow line on the subchart here. Nice entry point for a short just after 10:30 at the SPY 670 level. All right, so that's the short setup in the S&P 500, and it really paid just to keep holding that. As now SPX is broken down below that 6650 level. All right, that's the S&P 500. Sharp drop lower, consolidation for a couple of hours, and then a move down again. All right, so it looks like some green volume dots coming in, some buyers are coming in. Let's check. All right, so some put sellers are coming in now, shown by the rising blue line here, and then a few call buyers. The order flow alert just came in, signaling a potential reversal in hedging flow. And at this point, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in it, so we'll see. All right, that's the S&P 500. Let's take a look at Nasdaq. All right, so just like the S&P 500, there are two signals that we can take a look at for the Nasdaq. This is the Nasdaq index signal, showing options trades and market maker hedging activity. For the Nasdaq index components, we've already taken a look at those, QQQ and NDX. White line is price for NDX. Orange line shows calls, blue line shows puts. So this is showing traders are selling puts up until about 9:46. They were already selling calls. A few call buyers came in, And then this call peak occurred right here. And that's when the put sellers took their foot off the gas and became put buyers. So from 946 on, traders are buying puts, selling calls. Also, this looks like a large institutional block order here, this vertical line. So some large institution selling a large number of calls. So that's bearish momentum when the blue line and the orange line move in the same direction. NDX breaks down below the hedge wall, shown by this light red line here. And that's actually the volatility trigger that I mentioned before, the 650 volatility trigger. Traders continue to sell calls. This is a pretty large number for the Nasdaq index component, almost minus 3 billion selling calls. All right, back to Bookmap. NQ futures. Let's zoom in on this. First 3 hours of trade. Here's the reversal right around. There's the first reversal, 946. Another potential entry point for a short. Traders buying puts, selling calls. Prices versus lower. Breaks down below the QQQ 601 volatility trigger. You can see all the magenta volume dots coming in now, aggressive sellers. Down below the volatility trigger. There's the breakdown below the NDX 650 volatility trigger. Same magenta volume dots, aggressive sellers coming in. In the subchart here, you can see cumulative volume delta falling. Yellow line showing sell stop orders fueling that move lower. Large traders were fading that move. They were buying weakness with iceberg orders, shown by the rising light blue line. So far, not getting their way today. All right, so that's Nasdaq, also broken down of the 2-hour, broken down below the 2-hour consolidation. All right, I've got a lot of stocks to take a look at. Any questions about the indexes? All right, what I want to focus on today for the first few stocks is reactions at key levels. All right, the first is Microsoft. I don't have these levels drawn on my chart. I did not have time to do that today. So we'll see these levels in give me just a moment. I do have the levels on my Thinkorswim chart. So let's take a look at those. All right, so what I've done, Spotgamma provides a script for the indexes. And I've taken that, I modified it, so I can show the key levels on stocks. I have to update them manually. The Spotgamma index think script is updated automatically. You do have to replace it manually, but it is updated. But what I want to focus in on is reaction to key levels. All right, so one other thing to note is the Spotgamma levels were late today, quite late, in fact, came out about 9:45, so some of this information might not have been useful if you're seeing a reaction at a key level before, let's say 10 a.m. After 10 a.m., this is valid. So you can see, first of all, Amazon. So I have two of these charts. I have one on each screen showing 12 stocks. First, Amazon, and I did not, we can take a look at Amazon and Hero. So there's reaction at the 210 hedge wall key gamma strike, double top at that level. Google, also a double top at the 307.50 call wall. Microsoft, multiple test of the 400 put wall key gamma strike before breaking down below it, and also resistance at the 402.5 402.5 hedge wall. So let's take a look at Amazon first. We'll go through these quickly. Let's go to Amazon. There's the 210 hedge wall key gamma strike. Hero chart not providing a lot of information. So let's go to Bookmap. We'll go to Amazon. Double top around the 210 level. Then a breakdown. This breakdown was later in the day, 10:32. All right, next stock, Microsoft. Remember Microsoft 400 key gamma strike put wall, 402.50 hedge wall. So there's the reaction at the 402.50 level. So here's the first reaction at 400. 402.50 level. Actually, the first reaction just after the open. Large magenta dot showing the opening print. So it looks like that was above the 400 level. Then a test of the 400 level, 402.50 hedge wall support acting as resistance. Then a breakdown below the 400 level down to the liquidity. That's the limit buy orders shown by the heat map and Bookmap, acting as a magnet for price. And now some buyers have come in. You can see the green volume dots, aggressive buyers coming in. And Microsoft consolidating. So very nice pattern there. Brief bullish opening drive, then a reversal lower, now into consolidation. Pretty typical pattern. The move occurs in the morning and the consolidation in the afternoon. So let's take a look. Let's see what options traders have been doing. So let's go to Microsoft. A little bit more useful hero pattern here. Reversal in the call signal, and actually follows price by maybe a minute, maybe less. So traders are buying calls. Full alert comes in, signals significant options activity, potential reversal in hedging flow. That's exactly what happened. Price reverses lower. Then there's that reversal at the 402.50 hedge wall. And then price moved lower, broke down. So at this point, the put sellers had stopped. So the put sellers take the foot off the gas, and traders start selling calls again, and price move lower. All right, so now some call buyers have come in, as well as aggressive buyers. We saw that in Bookmap, green volume dots. All right, so Microsoft trying to pick itself up off the mat. All right, next, NVIDIA. Very bearish day in NVIDIA. Traders selling calls. And net for the day, they're also put buyers, shown by the falling blue or the orange and blue lines, but call sellers really driving price. A breakdown below the 185 call wall key gamma strike, down to and below the 182.50 hedge wall. And price did chop around the 82.50 hedge wall for a while. So let's go take a look at Bookmap. All right, so again, we're focusing on reactions at levels. Breakdown below the 185 call wall key gamma strike. Aggressive sellers start to come in, shown by the magenta volume dots. Net overall for the day, traders have been buying stocks, shown by all the green volume dots, rising cumulative volume delta, and the subchart here. But the call sellers and put buyers definitely on charge. And NVIDIA heading for the prime target today. the limit buy orders at 180, shown by the heat map, the history of limit orders in the order book. All right, so that's NVIDIA, reversal at the 185 call wall, key gamma strike. A little bit of consolidation around 182.50. And then a breakdown lower. All right, next stock, Tesla. Key for Tesla, reversal at the 400 hedge wall, key gamma strike, acting as resistance. That happened just before 10 a.m. Let's see what options traders are doing. So there's NVIDIA again, call sellers. Continue to sell dry price lower. Tesla. Hero pattern a little bit more difficult to read today. But the key thing that I wanted to highlight is this reversal at the 400 hedge wall, key gamma strike. All right, you can see the initial move lower just at the open, then a retest just before 10 a.m. All right, that's Tesla. It looks like Tesla today is primarily driven by call sellers, although traders are selling puts as well. And it looks like just based on delta notional, the put sellers are selling more delta notional than the call sellers. All right, so back to Bookmap. Test of 400 hedge wall, key gamma strike right at the open, then just before 10 a.m. and then Tesla reverses lower. All right, those are the stocks that I wanted to focus on, the levels in play. All right, next stock, I've got a couple of bullish stocks, or at least they were this morning. So let's take a look at Micron. All right, bullish opening drive, steep reversal, and now consolidation. You can see all the green volume dots, aggressive buyers coming in. And taking Micron up just below the 430 call wall. So absorption at that level. Buyers are exhausted. Sellers start to come in. And then Micron chopping up and down around VWAP, shown by this light blue line here. And again, for those of you who just recently joined, my pin tool's not working today for some reason. So I'm hope you can see what I'm pointing at. All right, so let's see what options traders are doing. So let's go to Micron. Very strong bullish opening drive. Classic pattern here. Aggressive call buyers at the open. When traders buy calls, market makers sell the calls. They have to buy stock to hedge their delta exposure. And then the call buyers take the foot off the gas at right around 429, just below the 430 call wall. Note also, traders were initially selling puts. Then a large put buyer came in, institutional kickoff there, shown by the large vertical line there. Then after that, the put sellers became put buyers. Now more put sellers coming in. A couple of large block orders, institutional orders. All right, so just looking at the call line, typical pattern. Full alert at the open. Aggressive call buyers. Strong bullish opening drive. And then call buyers take the foot off the gas. So that was a 30-minute opening drive. Plenty of time to find an entry point for long, with a clear target of the 430 call wall, high liquidity. All right, that's Micron. Another one, Nebula Systems, Imbus. It was strong earlier this week on news that NVIDIA had made a $2 billion investment in Nebius. Aggressive buyers at the open, a lot of green volume dots. Let's see what options traders are doing. Imbus, another bullish opening drive. Again, traders buy calls, market sell the calls. They have to buy stock, their delta exposure, and not quite as sharp a turn as Micron, but this line did start to level off. So steep, not so steep, and then flat to slightly down. Another clue here is the put sellers became put buyers right around 10 a.m. and that's when Imbus started to level off and started to grind down. All right, so there have been some other stocks in play for today. We'll take a look at Meta. Meta in the news that it's going to delay its AI model based on testing. It did not do as well as expected compared to other AI models, I guess, Gemini and OpenAI. So Meta down pretty sharply today. Let's see what options traders have been doing. So initially there were some call buyers, and then Meta reversed lower right around 10:30. So there were put sellers and call buyers. Meta reversed lower right around 10:30 as the call buyers became call sellers, and then the put sellers took the foot off the gas. So there's Meta. Another stock, Adobe, reported earnings. I think Adobe gapped down, rallied for a few minutes up until about 9:42. Traders selling calls from the open. There were a few put sellers. They took the foot off the gas, and that's when Adobe started to consolidate. So Adobe pretty much chopping up and down around the 255 level. Close to highs of the day right now. All right, so that's Adobe. Let's take a look at oil. All right, so this is definitely what is bothering traders. Pretty choppy hero signal, but net for the day. Traders are buying calls and selling puts. Looks like USO has made it up to and above the 120 call wall. So good bullish trade for USO. Grinding higher. There's a break below, above the 120 call wall that just happened a few minutes ago, just after 2 p.m. And USO continues higher. All right, let's check on the indexes. Anybody have any questions? Any stocks you want me to take a look at? All right, ES continues to make series of lower highs, down well below the 6650 positive gamma. Let's check Nasdaq. All right, Nasdaq also continues to make a series of lower highs. So let's see where S&P 500 might be heading. Another trend break short here. All right, so let's check this chart first. All right, so next level down is the SPY 660 absolute gamma strike put wall. Remember, the absolute gamma strike moved down to that 660 level from 675 level, 675 yesterday, and on Wednesday it was 690. So 2 days of drops in the SPY absolute gamma strike. But ES so far trading well above its lower daily expected move, which is right around 6606. Let's check our SPX chart. All right, so also the SPX 6600 put wall is down below. So that's another 37 points down. Take a look at SPY. So we can isolate, get a clear look at the 660 level. Go back to SPY. All right, there's the SPY 660 put wall down below. So far today, SPY has dropped down from 672 to almost 662. So a 10-point drop lower in SPY today. So it's about 100 points in SPX and ES. Nice short if you're still holding on to it. Ferris, welcome. Glad you're here. Could I check the Dow? So let's see. That's not something that I normally look at. You want to take a look at DIA, and I don't have any Spotgamma levels for the Dow components. All right, so there's Diamond moving down from 472 to 67. But again, I don't have any Spotgamma levels for the Dow. Let's check YM. Down from 47,150 down to 46.25. All right, back to SPY. Key levels down below. SPY 660. Absolute gamma strike put wall and the SPX 6600 put wall. Let's go back and check Hero. And I'm going to go to the total signal. Let's check the equity signal first. All right, so it continues to make lower highs, lower lows. Index signal. Choppy. Afternoon chop. All right, everyone, a couple of reminders for next week. Let's take a look at something here. Let's go to the Spotgamma dashboard home screen. Take a look at the events calendar for next week. All right, so next week, there's some big events. First of all, key event, FOMC, Wednesday afternoon. So the meeting begins on Tuesday and concludes at 2 p.m. on Wednesday. That will be in the middle of my webinar. That's when the announcement comes out. So at 2 p.m., I'll cover the live market. I'll stop whatever I'm doing. We'll watch the live market. We'll take a look at the statement. And then the press conference begins at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time as my webinar ends. All right, so that is the key data, key information next week. Looks like also that services PMI week after next. All right, so earnings. Let's take a look at the earnings chart. I don't know if that goes out to next week or not, but I believe Micron reports earnings next week. So we can actually check that. And then also the NVIDIA GTC conference begins on Monday, I believe. So big events next week. Let's go to Thinkorswim. Take a look at the charts. Go to Micron. Sorry, Thinkorswim's slow today. All right, so Micron reports earnings on the 18th. So that would be after the close on the 18th, which would be a Wednesday. All right, so some big stuff coming up next week. Be sure to tune in. Last call for questions, comments. All right, again, big stuff coming up next week. FOMC, NVIDIA conference, Micron earnings. And we'll talk about it next week. All right, everyone, have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. And I will see you on Monday. Bye.